Well, where does the EU have its trade agreements with? Currently not with the United States, the biggest economy, not with China, the second biggest economy, not with Japan, the third biggest economy, not with the Gulf. So the EU doesn't have a great track record on getting trade liberalisation.
Okay, let's take one example. Michael Gove, Agriculture Secretary, he said yesterday it'll be easier to sell pig's ears to China if we leave the EU because the regulations will make that easier. When you compare that example against, say, the threat to UK financial services being sold through to the EU.
I would give you a different example. I would say the UK is an 80% service economy. There are tremendous service sector opportunities in China. The real gain of being able to do a trade agreement with China would be in that service sector, which is why, for example, next year the UK is taking a major expo to Hong Kong to sell our service sector capabilities, which would be much better were we able to do so with a trade agreement. It doesn't look like
Germany sells more services to China than we do.
But we want to get liberalisation of the global services sector. The EU has so far been unable to do that.
Switzerland has signed a trade deal with China that excludes lots of these things. There has to be ownership by a Chinese partner. Switzerland, which is an economy not so dissimilar to ours, it hasn't really cracked trade in China, has it?
But what you're effectively saying is that, we have to trade from inside the European Union. Most of the world doesn't trade from inside the European Union. Most of the world does extremely well. We have a trade deficit with Europe. We've got a trade surplus with countries like the United States.
The basic trade-off is, we're going to lose some trade with the EU to gain some trade outside the EU.
What we want is a free and open trading agreement with the European Union. Now, the FTA that we will negotiate with the European Union is different from any that we've ever negotiated before. Normally, if we are negotiating a free trade agreement, we're at a different place and we're trying to diminish the gap. In the European Union, we are in complete coincidence, zero tariffs, complete regulatory equivalence. The question is, will we have divergence for reasons of political ideology driven by the prospect of ever closer union? That is what it's going to be all about.
What's the plan if the EU chooses to play hardball? What are we going to do? What weapons do you have up your sleeve? What negotiating tactics?
First of all, that would not be wise. And let me tell you why that would be not wise for them, because I've just come back from the Far East and investors there are saying there are lots of places in the world to put our money, not just Europe. And if the European Union is going to make it very difficult to access from Europe, the UK, the world's fifth biggest economy, we might think of moving our investments elsewhere. So Europe cannot have this debate as though it's occurring in an economic and political vacuum. It is not. It is part of a very competitive global economy. And what you're in fact saying is that European politicians would sacrifice the prosperity of their own people to make a political point. Well, they might, but that would be very dangerous.
That is exactly what they think we have done. They have exactly the parallel thing. Britain, for a political point, is sacrificing its economic prosperity. So they just take a different view from you. They may play hardball. What is your plan if they do?
Well, first of all, we are exercising our legal rights under EU treaty to leave the European Union. So it's not something we've done against the rules. It's not something we've done to spite the rest, which is the interpretation I think you're putting on it. But we are not sacrificing our economic well-being. We've said we want an open, liberal, comprehensive trade agreement with Europe, but we also want the freedom to be able to develop our trading interests elsewhere, which is a perfectly reasonable thing to do. It's what most other countries in the world do.
So I notice you are unable to say that you have a plan for if the EU did choose to play it hardball for example, charge us for access to their
That's not what I'm saying at all. We're conducting extensive reviews across Whitehall on contingency if we don't reach a deal. But we're certainly not going to be telling those we're negotiating with, and certainly not on TV, what those contingencies might be.
You mentioned the idea of free ports as one thing at a business event yesterday here. Is that something you're thinking about? That would literally be saying maybe Southampton is outside the British Customs Union. Is that a possibility?
We will want to look at a whole range of issues, and it would not be wise for us to intimate to those we're negotiating with what they might be.
So this brings us back to optimism, doesn't it? Because in a way, every time we're asked a difficult question, we're greeted by the optimism that says it's going to be all right.
Okay. Well, let's use the EU's arguments. 90% of the increase in global trade will be outside Europe in the next 10 to 15 years. It's where we're going to have to put most of our efforts to getting our increased market access. We need to see our exports rise. We'll also want to see both outward direct investment rise and inward direct investment rise. We're seeing optimistic trends at the present time. We want to see an open relationship with Europe in terms of trade. Who are the people who are actually threatening the well-being of the status quo? It is those that we are negotiating with in the European Union. Now, what I hope is that as we get closer to really discussing the end state, they will understand that if they want the prosperity of their people to be guaranteed as much as ours, we must maintain an open trading environment.
Every answer is you're hoping they will fall into line with your view rather than stick to the line that they've been taking. That's optimism. And maybe they will, but maybe they won't.
And maybe elected governments who don't take the prosperity of their own people into account, or who drive a political agenda in a direction their people don't want, may not be the governments for all that very long. Many people in this country, including many Remainers, will have listened to what Mr. Juncker said last week, which is we do want ever closer union, we do want a single president, a single European army and a single economic policy. I certainly feel totally validated in voting to leave when I heard that speech. I think many Remainers may question their decision too.
Liam Fox, thank you very much indeed.